"Send her to the back with the bandages," Dale Kovac said, loud enough for the whole motor pool to hear. "That's where the small ones are useful. Wrap a wrist. Hold a hand." He turned to the ring of men around him, all helmets and grins, and spread his arms like a man telling the funniest thing he knew. "We don't put a 5-foot nothing on a long gun and pray. We send someone else, someone who can actually pull the trigger when it counts." The motor pool laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the laugh filled the bay and bounced off the corrugated walls and landed where it was meant to land, on the woman standing by the weapons rack with a spotting scope in her hand. Ren Halloran did not flinch. Her eyes did not drop. Her jaw did not tighten the way a jaw tightens when it wants to say something it shouldn't. Her hands kept doing exactly what they had been doing, checking the scope's elevation knob with 2 fingers, counting the clicks by feel. She breathed out, slow, through her nose. Then she set the scope down on the felt, lined up so its lens faced away from the dust, and she said nothing at all. That was the part the men misread. They thought silence meant she had nothing. They didn't know that silence, for her, was a kind of arithmetic. While they laughed, she was already doing the math on every one of them. Distance to the door, weight of the load each one carried. How slow they'd be if the ground ever opened up under them. She looked small standing there. She knew something they didn't. In 11 days, every man laughing in that bay would owe her his life, and Dale Kovac would say her name into a radio in a voice that shook, and he would never laugh in that motor pool again. If you're new here, do me one favor before we go further. Subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments, because I like knowing where in the world you're listening from. And stay until the end, because there's a moment, about 2/3 of the way through this, where the loudest man on that base has to key his radio and beg the woman he humiliated to save him, and I want you to hear exactly what it costs him. Stay with me. I want to see how far this story travels. 11 days earlier, the valley was the color of old bone. It was the kind of heat that didn't feel like weather. It felt like a hand pressing flat on the back of your neck, and the dust got into everything. Your teeth, your watch, the action of your rifle, if you let it. Outpost Halcyon sat at the mouth of the Tagan Valley, a horseshoe of sandbag walls and shipping containers wedged against a ridge. 2,200 meters of open ground in front of it, and a single road running through. It was a quiet posting. It was supposed to be a quiet posting. Nobody at Halcyon had read Ren Halloran's full file, because nobody had bothered. They saw a small woman with a medical badge and a sniper qualification they assumed was a clerical accident, and they filed her under harmless. What the file said, if you opened it, was that she'd shot competition long range since she was 12, that she'd placed in matches against men twice her size and 3 times her age, and that she carried in her head a library of wind and angle and bullet drop that most shooters spend a whole career trying to build. She'd grown up on a high plain where the wind never quit, and her grandfather Walt had taught her on a worn-out bolt gun before she was tall enough to see over the bench. He used to put his hand flat on her shoulder when she got twitchy and wait for her breathing to slow. "Stillness first," he'd tell her. "The wind, the range, the math, that's all just decoration. You get still, you get honest, and the shot is only the period at the end of the sentence." She had buried him 2 years ago. She still heard him every time she lay down behind a rifle. She heard him, the way you hear your own name. The first week set the pattern, and the pattern was this. They kept her at the edge of everything. When the platoon ran range drills, Kovac assigned her to logbook duty, scoring other men's shots, which she did without comment, in a small, neat hand, knowing exactly how many of those shots she could have called before the trigger broke. When the patrol roster went up, her name was on medical standby, useful, expendable, indoors. The institution had a slot for her, and the slot was a corner. There was a young supply private named Toby Farrow who ran the armory window, and on the third day he watched her clear and reassemble her rifle while she waited for a parts requisition. He wasn't a shooter. He didn't have the words for what he was seeing, but he saw her hands move over that weapon without her eyes following them, the way a piano player's hands find keys in the dark, and something about it made him go quiet. "You do that fast," he said, because it was the only thing he had. She glanced up. "Muscle remembers," she said, and went back to it. He didn't understand what he'd watched. He only knew it didn't match the joke he'd heard in the chow line. He'd remember it later. He'd remember it for the rest of his life. It wasn't only Wren they shrank. Her spotter was a younger soldier named Myron Okafor. Loud where Wren was quiet, quick to laugh, quicker to take offense, and twice as good with a spotting scope as anyone gave her credit for. In a briefing that first week, she called the range to a far ridgeline before the lieutenant's laser even settled. 810 meters, she said, flat out. And the room moved on as if a chair had spoken. Kovac didn't even look at her. He repeated the same number 40 seconds later, off the rangefinder, and the room wrote it down like it was scripture. Marin's jaw worked. She caught Wren's eye across the room. Wren gave her the smallest shake of the head. Not now, not them. Later. Later turned out to be the range, at dusk, when the platoon had gone to chow and the line was empty. The two of them stayed back to zero a replacement optic, and somewhere in the quiet of it, they stopped being a sergeant and a specialist and became two people who were simply good at the same hard thing. Marin called wind, and Wren sent rounds, and the steel 400 meters out rang and rang and rang, a clean, flat bell across the cooling dirt, and Marin started laughing, not at anything, just at the joy of watching someone do a thing perfectly. "How are you even real?" she said. Wren almost smiled, the faintest thing, gone before it finished. "You called that last gust before I felt it," she said. "You're the real one." It was the only warm moment either of them would get for a long time, and they both knew enough to let it be small. The day it broke the way these things always break. Out of a clear morning that promised nothing. A supply run was rolling north through the valley. 4 vehicles, routine. The kind of drive men did with their helmets loose and their minds half home. Kovac had the lead. The outpost was sleepy. Wren was in the aid station inventorying gauze because that was where they'd put her when the first transmission came through the net and the whole morning tipped over. It wasn't words at first. It was the sound underneath the words. The flat hammering crack of an ambush, 3 sides at once, and a man trying to talk over it. The convoy had driven into a horseshoe of dug-in positions at the valley's narrow throat, 800 meters of fire lanes that someone had measured and ranged and waited months to use. 2 vehicles were dead in the road inside the first minute. Kovach's voice came through, stretched thin and climbing. Contact, contact, troops in the open. We are pinned. We have wounded. In the operations container, Captain Silas Bracken stood over the map with the radio handset against his chest and the whole problem laid out in front of him in a language he suddenly couldn't lie to. The convoy was beyond the reach of the outpost's own guns. The quick reaction force was 40 minutes out over Bad Road. The enemy held the high ground on both flanks, and the only thing on Halcyon that could touch those positions across that distance, the only weapon system on this base that could reach into that horseshoe and start taking the shooters off the ridge one at a time, was a long rifle in the hands of a sergeant he had spent a week treating like a medic with a hobby. He knew it. Every man in that container knew it. The math didn't care about the joke in the motor pool. Bracken keyed the net. Halloran. A pause. One breath. Get to the south tower. Bring the long gun. Then, because the moment demanded it, and he was not a small enough man to dodge it, he added the part that cost him. I should have had you out there from day one. That's on me. Go. She was already moving. She'd been moving since the first crack on the net. By the time Bracken finished his sentence, she had the rifle off the rack, the bag of magazines over her shoulder, Marin 2 steps behind her with the spotting scope and a face gone pale and serious. And the 2 of them went up the south tower ladder into the wind like the building was on fire. Down in the valley, in the smoke and the ringing, Dale Kovach was making a decision his whole body did not want to make. He had 2 men down behind a wrecked truck. He had rounds coming off both ridges, the long, lazy snap of accurate fire that means someone good is shooting at you. He had no air, no artillery, and 40 minutes he did not have. And he had a radio. He pressed himself flat against the engine block, and he looked at that radio. And he understood with a sick clarity exactly who was on the other end of the only call that could save him, and exactly what he had said about her in front of 40 men. The channel was quiet for a long moment, just the firefight, and his own breathing loud in his ears. Then he keyed it, and the whole valley seemed to lean in. "Overwatch," he said, and his voice did a thing his voice never did. It broke, right in the middle of the word, and he had to start the next part twice. "Overwatch, this is Kovach. I need—" He swallowed. He said her name like it was a stone he was lifting off his own chest. "I need Halloran. I need Sergeant Halloran on the gun. Right now." And inside the wrecked truck, a corporal who had laughed in the motor pool 11 days ago turned and stared at the radio. And beside him, a private stopped reloading. And for half a second, even in all that noise, the men around Dale Kovach went still. Because they had all heard the joke. And now they had all heard this. And they understood that the ground under everything they believed had just shifted. Up in the tower, the answer came back, and it did not sound like a medic, and it did not sound like a 5-foot nothing, and it did not sound like anyone's afterthought. It came back clipped and level, and absolutely without fear, the voice of someone for whom this was simply the work. "Kovach, Overwatch, I have you. Stay down and stay where you are. I'm going to take the South Ridge first. Watch your west side in 90 seconds. It's about to get quiet over there. Halloran out." She lay down behind the rifle, and the world narrowed to a tube of light. Stillness first. Walt's voice, plain and steady in her head, exactly as if the old man were lying in the dust beside her. She slowed her breathing until the reticle stopped floating. Marin was already calling it, flat and fast. South Ridge, you're 11. Muzzle flash, rock cleft. 640. Wind quartering, left to right, 8, maybe 10. Wren made the correction. The small, honest math of it clicking into place, held off the edge of the cleft, and broke the trigger between heartbeats. The rifle's report rolled out across the valley and came back off the far wall a full second later, a deep, flat crack chasing its own echo. 640 meters away, a shooter in a rock cleft stopped being a problem. Hit, Marin said. Next one, same ridge, 40 meters right, behind the green bush. Wren shifted, exhaled, fired. The bolt cycled with a hard, oiled clack. Another flat crack, another long echo, another silence where a gun had been. The character of the firefight began to change. The men in the road heard it happen, heard the incoming fire off the south ridge thin out, one position at a time. Each shot from the tower a different sound than the chatter around them, slower, heavier, final. She walked the south ridge end to end. 11 minutes, position by position. 8 shooters, 8 shots that mattered. A handful of corrections in between when the wind shifted and Marin caught it before Wren felt it. The count climbed in her head, the way Walt taught her to count, quiet, unhurried, one number at a time. Down in the road, the volume of fire dropped by half, and Kovach got his 2 wounded, dragged behind the engine block, and for the first time in 12 minutes, he let himself believe they might live. Then the North Ridge woke up, and the easy part was over. They were better on the north side. Somebody over there understood what was killing them, and that somebody pulled his shooters back off their flashes and started working in pairs, one drawing fire, one moving. And he sent 2 men down off the ridge and around the base of the tower, into the dead ground where Wren couldn't depress the rifle low enough to reach. And the first she knew of it was the sound of boots on gravel below her, and a burst of fire that walked up the sandbags and punched through the plywood a hand's width above her head. Time stretched the way it does when the ground itself turns against you. She felt the change in pressure as a round split the air beside her ear. A flat, hard slap she felt in her teeth before she heard it. Splinters of plywood stung the side of her face. She saw, in the same half-second, the sandbag in front of her open up and spill its guts of pale dirt across the rifle, across her hands, across the scope, and she understood with total clarity that the long gun was the wrong tool now, that the men below her were close, that the rifle that could reach 800 meters could not reach the 2 men standing under her own floor. She heard Marin shout her name. She heard rounds chewing the lip of the tower, the specific tin can rattle of bullets through corrugated steel, and under it the scrape of boots climbing. She did not freeze. Stillness first did not mean stillness now. She rolled off the rifle, drew the pistol off her chest in one motion her hand had made 10,000 times in the dark, and came up onto her knees as the first man's head and shoulders cleared the top of the ladder. She fired twice. He went back off the ladder without a sound. The second man fired up through the floor, blind, and she felt the boards jump under her hip, and she put 3 rounds down through the plywood where the muzzle flash had been, and the climbing stopped and the gravel went quiet. Her ears rang one clean high note. Her hands did not shake. Not yet. Later, they would. Not yet. "Clear," Marin said, breathless, peering down over the rail with her own pistol out, having moved to cover the ladder without being told. Her own decision, her own angle, the thing that bought Wren the 2 seconds she needed. Clear. They're down. You're clear. Wren was already back behind the long gun, blowing dirt off the scope, finding her breathing again. Good eyes, she said. That was all. From Wren, it was a medal. But the man running the North Ridge had bought what he wanted with those 2 soldiers' lives, time and her attention. And now he played his real card. A heavy machine gun opened up from a notch high on the north wall, 890 meters out by Marin's Reed. And it was not shooting at the tower. It was shooting at the road. It was shooting at the wrecked truck and the wounded behind it, long raking bursts that walked sparks across the vehicle's flank. And the sound of it reached the tower as a deep, tearing rip. And under that sound, on the net, Wren heard Kovach's voice go up an octave. We can't move. We are taking heavy fire. We have a man hit. We have a man hit bad. Talk to me, Wren said into the net, eyes already swinging the scope to the notch. Who's hit? Decker, Kovach said. Private Decker. He's 19. He's... Overwatch. That gun is going to walk right through us. You have to. I see it. She did see it. 890 meters. A hard target tucked in a notch, with maybe a foot of shooter showing above the gun's receiver. In failing light now, the sun gone behind the ridge, and the valley filling up with blue shadow, and a cross wind that had picked up to a gusting 12 to 15 knots and would not hold still. It was the hardest shot on the field. It was the hardest shot she'd ever take that mattered. Marin read it off twice to be sure. 890. Wind's the problem. It's surging. Give me hold. She watched the dust on the far slope, the flag of it bending. Now, it's eased. Now, while it's eased. Stillness first. Walt's hand on her shoulder, across 2 years and a grave. Wren let the breath out, all of it, to the bottom. And in the quiet at the very bottom of that breath, in the half-second where her heart paused between beats, she held a hair high and a body's width into the wind and asked the rifle for everything it had. The trigger broke like ice. The round was in the air for over a full second. It was the longest second of the whole day. The machine gun fired the entire time it flew, and then it stopped, mid-burst, cut off clean, and a beat later, the flat crack of the shot rolled back off the far wall and into the tower like a door closing somewhere deep in the earth. The notch went dark. The road went quiet. Marin made a sound that wasn't a word. Guns down, Wren said into the net, flat as a table. North Ridge, gun is down. Kovach, get your wounded. The high positions are dark. I'll hold the line. She'd lay there in the new silence, the rifle hot under her hands, and counted what was left to count, and the count came out at 26. Then she keyed the net one more time, in the same voice she'd used for all of it. Engagement complete. For a moment, the only thing on the channel was wind and breathing. Then, on the road, somebody started trying to raise the wounded private, and the dread came in. Decker! Kovach's voice. Decker, talk to me. Sam. Sam, you with me. Silence. Medic! I need a medic on Decker. Silence on the channel where a 19-year-old's voice should have been. 3 seconds. 5. Long enough for everyone listening to feel the floor drop. Decker, come on, kid. Come on. Nothing. And in the tower, Wren was already off the rifle, already slinging it across her back and reaching for the other bag, the one they'd given her instead of respect, because the work had just changed again, and she changed with it. She came down the ladder and crossed the open ground at a flat run while the light died. and she went to her knees in the dirt beside Private Sam Decker, 19 years old, and the hands that had been so still on the rifle a minute ago became something else entirely. They became gentle. They became fast. The same precision turned all the way around, not taking a life apart now, but holding one together. She cut his blouse open with a hooked blade and found the wound high in his thigh where the big vessel runs, the blood coming dark and steady and far too much of it. And she packed it and drove the heel of her hand down into it with all her weight and reached for the tourniquet with her other hand and had it high and tight and cranked down before Kovacs had finished saying her name. "You're okay," she told the boy, and her voice was a different instrument than it had been on the radio. "Sam, look at me. You're okay. I've got you." His eyes were huge and white, in a face going gray, and his hand came up and grabbed her wrist hard, and he asked her the question, the one they always ask, in the small cracked voice of a kid, a long way from home. "Am I dying?" he said. "I'm dying. I can feel it. Tell me, am I dying?" She did not look away. She put her free hand flat against the side of his face and made him hold her eyes, and she said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. "Not today. Not on my watch." 4 words and then 4 more, and she made them a promise and a fact at the same time, because that was the only kind of comfort she knew how to give, and the only kind worth anything. "You've got a sister, right? You told Kovacs about a sister." He nodded, crying now. "You're going to see her. You're going to teach her to drive that truck you keep talking about. Stay with me and breathe. In, out, with me." And she kept her weight on the wound and her eyes on his eyes, and she breathed with him, in and out, in the dirt, in the dark, while the dust they had both been choking on all week settled slowly back to the ground around them, and the helicopter that would carry him out came in low, over the ridge with its light swinging, and his pulse stayed under her fingers, thready and stubborn and alive. She did not let go until the medics lifted him onto the bird. She had killed 26 men with stillness and saved 1 with the same hands, and she did not see any difference between the 2. It was all just the work. 11 days after the motor pool, she was standing in that same bay, cleaning the same rifle on the same felt, when Dale Kovacs came to find her. He came in slow. He came in without the men around him, which was the first thing anyone noticed, because nobody had ever seen Kovacs walk into a room without an audience to fill it up. He was a big man, and the bay had always seemed small when he was in it, but he didn't take up the space the way he used to. He stood a few feet off and turned his helmet over in his hands, and could not, for a long moment, find anywhere to put his eyes. The men along the wall went quiet. They had heard the original joke. They knew exactly what room they were standing in. "I need to say something," Kovacs said, "and I need to say it here, where I said the other thing." His voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. Every word seemed to cost him a separate effort, like lifting weight he wasn't braced for. "What I said about you, about sending someone else." His jaw worked. He stopped, started again. It wasn't just wrong about the shooting. I want to be clear about that. I could have called it a tactical mistake and let it go, and you'd have let me, because that's the kind of soldier you are. But it was bigger than tactics. He made himself look at her. His eyes were wet, and he didn't bother hiding it, which from a man like Kovac was its own kind of nakedness. I decided what you were before I knew anything. I made everybody else decide it too. And then I called you on that radio, because you were the only one who could save my men, and you came, and you saved every one of them, including the ones who laughed. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I'm not going to ask you to forgive that. I don't think you should. I just needed you to hear me say it, in front of them, out loud. Wren set the cleaning rod down. She was quiet for exactly 5 seconds, which in that bay was an eternity, and the whole room held its breath for whatever she'd say. Understood, Staff Sergeant, she said. 2 words and a rank. Not forgiveness, not vindication. An acknowledgement that asked for nothing and gave him nowhere to hide, and somehow, by giving him nothing to push against, let him set the weight down anyway. He nodded once, slow, and something in his shoulders came loose that had been wound tight for 11 days. Captain Bracken found her later, alone, at the edge of the helipad, where she'd gone to watch the dusk come down over the valley that had tried to kill them all. He didn't speak right away. He stood beside her and looked out at the same blue shadow, filling the same throat of rock. And she watched him arrive, in real time, at something he didn't want to know about himself. He took his cap off. He turned it in his hands, the way Kovac had turned his helmet. Then he did a strange thing for a captain. He sat down on the low wall of sandbags, deliberately, so that he was below her, so that he had to look up to meet her eyes, and he stared at the ground between his boots for a long moment before he could speak. I read your file this morning, he said quietly. The whole thing. Should have read it the day you got here. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, briefly, the way a tired man does, except he wasn't tired. He was ashamed. A man said a cruel thing in my motor pool, and I heard about it, and I did nothing, because it was easier, because you weren't loud about it, because the loud ones make the noise, and the quiet ones do the work, and I let myself forget that the second part is the only part that matters. He breathed out. This isn't on Kovac, not just him. This is on all of us. On me first. He stood, finally, and looked at her level, soldier to soldier. And he gave her the only words that fit. 3 of them, simple and heavy and real. You held the line. That was all. He didn't dress it up. By the next morning, her name was off medical standby, and at the top of the patrol roster, and a request had gone up the chain for a commendation that named 2 people, Sergeant Wren Halloran and Specialist Marin Okafor, who had called the wind that killed a machine gun at 890 meters in the dark, and who would never again be a chair that spoke in a briefing room. The change in Kovac, when it came the way real change comes, not in a speech, but in a small, ugly moment where the old self would have done one thing and the new self did another. A week later, a green private named Reese, brand new, full of borrowed swagger, made a crack in the chow line about the medic playing sniper. Repeating the joke he'd heard was funny, not knowing the ground had moved. The bay went cold, and it was Kovac who turned around, slow, and set his tray down, and got very quiet, and said, "Say that again." Reese didn't. "That's Sergeant," Kovac said, low enough that everyone had to lean in to hear it. "Put 26 rounds into the men who were trying to kill me, in the dark, in a crosswind, while 2 of them were climbing up to put a bullet in her, and then she ran across open ground and kept Decker alive with her hands. You weren't there. I was. You don't get to make that joke. Nobody does. Not in front of me. He picked his tray back up. You want to earn the right to have an opinion about her. You go be half that good for 10 years, and then come talk to me. And he walked away, and he sat down at her table, not across from her, where he used to stand against her, but beside her, on the same side, facing the same way. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just sat there and ate, and that was the whole speech. It was Toby Farrow, the supply private from the armory window, who said the thing that stuck. A reporter came through the outpost a month later, doing a piece on the valley, and she asked the kid at the armory what it had been like, and Farrow thought about it. And he didn't reach for anything fancy because he didn't have anything fancy. He just remembered watching a pair of hands move over a rifle in the dark before he understood what he was looking at. I saw her clean that gun on day 3, he said. I didn't get it then. I do now. He shrugged like the rest of it was obvious. She saved all of us. The whole convoy. Every guy who laughed. All of us. Then he said the part the reporter put in the article, the simplest version of the only thing that mattered. What people saw when they looked at her, that was about them. It was never about her. Wren didn't read the article. By the time it ran, she was somewhere else, lying behind a rifle on a different ridge, with Marin calling wind beside her, doing the work the same as always. There was a morning before she rotated out, where Kovac caught her at the vehicles. Both of them loaded up and headed opposite ways, and he stuck out his hand, and she took it, and the handshake lasted 1 second longer than a handshake needs to, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing left that needed saying. He nodded. She nodded. She climbed into the truck. She didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the thing that had settled into her, sitting low and quiet under her ribs as the outpost shrank in the mirror. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't the satisfaction of being proven right in front of the men who doubted her. It was something older and steadier than that. The thing Walt had been trying to hand her all those years ago on the high plane, with his hand flat on her shoulder. She had been exactly who she was when it counted. Not louder, not bigger, not finally seen by people who'd been too small to see her. Just still and honest, and there, with her hands doing the work nobody else could do. The valley dropped away behind her. The road opened up ahead. She watched it come, level-eyed and calm. A small woman in a big truck, already thinking about the wind.